Before we get to the episode, exciting news. I have a new podcast, a second podcast. I am the host and producer of the Strandcast, the official podcast for Strand Bookstore in New York City at 12th and Broadway, the coolest independent bookstore. And now there's a podcast every other week featuring long-form conversations with authors from different genres. The Strandcast is available on iTunes and Stitcher. Just search for the Strandcast. Links will be in the show notes, of course, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And now for the show. And hello there. Welcome to a new episode of Talk Music Talk with Boyce. I am Boyce. This is my podcast that you are checking out. For that first-time listener, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, both established and emerging, singers, singer-songwriters, even music therapists, music journalists. And on this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to Antonio Sanchez. He is a drummer, a composer, a band leader, works in jazz, although his music features many other strains of music. He is a 5-time Grammy winner, born in Mexico City, but based in Brooklyn. He's been playing professionally since his teens, and eventually he ended up leaving Mexico to attend Berklee in Boston. Since those early days, he has had a career of milestones, including being a longtime member of the Pat Metheny Group. He did the drum score for the soundtrack to Birdman from 2014, which he received a Golden Globe nomination for. He is scoring the TV version of Get Shorty, which is on EPIX. And don't forget the aforementioned 5 Grammys. Plus, he has a wonderful body of work as a band leader, including his most recent release, Lines in the Sand, with his band Migration. In the conversation, we talk about those highlights, plus his influences, his songwriting process, the challenges of being Mexican and playing drums in jazz. Plus, we talk about dealing with immigration in his music. We talk about what it took to leave Mexico's music scene and also what it took to break out on his own as a band leader. And, of course, we talk about Lines in the Sand and what he is working on next. He gave me a sneak peek of his next album that comes out in 2020, and it is absolutely brilliant. After the conversation, you will hear the title track, Lines in the Sand, the full 26 minutes after the conversation. But here it is, without further ado, my interview with Antonio Sanchez. Enjoy. So I have to say that you've done the impossible for me. You've made me like drum solos.
Well, you're welcome.
Sure. How did you do that?
It's funny because lately I've been talking and writing about that and doing master classes about how to be as lyrical as possible and how to basically tell a story.
Okay.
Storytelling to me is the most important thing in music or in cinema or, whatever art it is, I think. Narrative and having a strong storytelling element, that's what keeps people interested in it. And you start seeing what the story is about. Yeah. And I always, give examples of how on the drums you can really start talking about something, and talking, I'm doing quotes with my hands right now. And then continue talking about the same subject and then transition to something else. But if you're talking about drum solos and all of a sudden, I love scrambled eggs, that to me, musically is what a lot of people do. Okay. And there's a lot of people that are incredibly capable craftsmen and craftswomen, but they're not real artists. And to me, that's the difference between artists and craftsmen or women. It's just the ability to engage, to tell a story, and to make people just follow them wherever they want to go. Yeah.
When and how did you learn to tell a story? Because a lot of times you will hear stuff and it's like the technique's there, but it sounds self-indulgent what the person's doing.
Absolutely.
But like it doesn't with your work.
And that's exactly one of the things that I try to combat in myself. And I try to, speak the gospel about, not not doing that, because it's so easy to do that when you're a drummer. You start relying on licks and patterns that you've practiced a million times, and that's cool to a certain extent. But the ability to really be in the moment and have some kind of narrative going, it takes a lot of mind space and discipline and patience. That's one of the main things, because as a drummer or as a musician, you leave a couple of seconds of space, and especially if you're by yourself, you're playing by yourself, that feels like a year. So to befriend space is a very, very powerful tool that musicians should embrace.
Is there a version of you that exists that was that drummer?
Oh my God! Yes. I mean, when I started studying at Berklee when I was 21, I came fresh from Mexico City, and I was really into fusion, and I was practicing a lot of technique and double bass drum pedal, and all these things that were definitely flashy, and a lot of drummers would be impressed by what I was doing, but I was not getting any gigs, and I couldn't understand why, if I was the fastest drummer around. And then little by little, I started hitting brick wall after brick wall, and then, truth started appearing before me slowly. And now, especially because I was in that mind space for such a long time, that's why I feel like I can talk about that with other people, other drummers that are in that same headspace.
Did someone pull you to the side and say something? Is that how you figured it out?
Yeah. I mean, not so subtle. It was not subtle at all. It was. It's a really funny story that I've told a million times. But it was a really good drum teacher that I had, Ron Savage, at Berklee College of Music, and it was my first semester, and I was walking around the hallways, and I had my stick bag, and he saw me, and he said, "Dude, you're a drummer, right?" Yeah. Why? Oh, because I have an advanced 8th semester bebop ensemble, and the drummer didn't show up. Do you want to play? And I'm like, yeah, I'm free. So I thought, okay, this is my chance to show them what a genius I am. And I had played jazz, and I knew that jazz was like bing, 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 and 2 and 4 on the hi hat. But, I didn't really play jazz. So I brought my drums, which back then you had to bring your own drums to every ensemble. And I had a big, like a fusion-y kit, with big toms and big bass drum and a lot of cymbals. And I started setting up, and all the kids in the ensemble who were already playing were looking at me like, what is this going to be like? But I was so eager to show them my talents that I set up the whole kit and caboodle. And then I started playing, and to make a long story short, Ron, the teacher, started basically dismantling my drums one piece by one piece until I was completely stripped to bass drum, hi-hat, snare drum, and ride cymbal. And then he told me, okay, now play solo, do everything you were doing. and of course, it was a huge slap in the face, but I deserved it completely. And I feel like that was the beginning of me trying to understand how to make music with the instrument rather than to play a bunch of prefabricated stuff. So how do you move forward from now? I mean, did you get the lesson immediately in that, or did it take a while for you to like, okay, he's right, there's some truth in that? I mean, it was to put me in the spot that way. Definitely did something because I had never been ridiculed like that, and he did do it in a mean way. He was just trying to prove a point, which came across beautifully. And he saw that I was not happy at the end of the ensemble, and he told me, "Look, I can appreciate all the work you put into your instrument because I can tell, but." You need to soak your ears into this kind of music if that's what you want to play. And at that point, that's definitely what I wanted to play. So then he gave me a bunch of discography, and I started listening. And when I got to, because I heard, a bunch of jazz drummers, but never really paid that much attention. I was more into rocky drum sound and, fusion-y, a lot of power, electric instruments. So acoustic jazz was not really my thing. But then one of the things he told me I should check out was Miles Davis quintet with Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, George Coleman, and Miles, and of course Tony Williams. Yeah. So the record was My Funny Valentine 4 and More live at Town Hall. And when I heard that, it did something to me the same way listening to The Police did something to me the first time, or listening to John Bonham, Led Zeppelin did. It was the same kind of like, my face and my head exploding. But this was different because it was not just that he was a virtuoso, Tony, which of course he was, but it was how the band was just moving together like if it was a living organism. And they were morphing, and whatever one person played affected the whole equation. So when I heard that, I was like, man, that I want to learn how to do that. And I want to play with people that want to play that way. And little by little, I started getting friends around Berklee that were interested in that kind of stuff. And slowly but surely, I started getting in that mind frame.
Okay. Well, aren't most people at Berklee there for more jazz than rock?
Yeah. Well, not now. I think now the pop thing is pretty big, especially after American Idol became a thing. The voice department exploded. And, it's such a big school that there's, space for everybody. But if you want to learn jazz, there's incredible teachers. But if you want to learn pop or rock, there's, the right teachers for that too.
Okay. So when you went there, what was your goal?
My goal was definitely to learn how to play jazz because I always, since I was a kid, since I was 5 or 6, I remember I would just have my little tape recorder and then press record and record a full cassette of just solo, drum solo. And, then I would listen to it. I don't know what I was thinking then, but I would listen to it and try to make sense of it. And I remember, it was, me trying to really tell a story. Yeah. But then on the road to becoming a better drummer, I started really getting into technique and started getting competitive with other drummers that seemed to play in a very flashy way. And then that kind of took over for a few years. But the good thing about that is that when I came out at the other end, then I had all this technique, which I acquired. And then it was just a matter of getting back to the roots of telling a story.
Oh, okay. So you started drums at 5, right?
Yeah, when I was 5. Yeah.
Okay. And when did piano?
Piano, I started playing around 13, 14, something like that. I took I always fiddled around with different instruments. There was a guitar laying around the house that I always would pick up and play. We didn't have a piano, but every time I would see a piano, I would just go crazy. I've always loved piano. And then I studied 1 year of private lessons and then applied to the conservatory. Okay. And then I was there for 4.5 years.
Okay. Yeah. So how did the two together, what do those do for your music? Drums and piano?
Well, drums were always my first love, and it was always hard for me to study piano because I was studying classical music because I saw Amadeus, the Milos Forman movie, which completely blew me away, and I wanted to learn how to do that too. Okay. So I started studying a bunch of of the great classical composers, and that, of course, did something to my head in a different way. Studying form and studying composition in that way, and storytelling in that context. Okay. But then it was hard for me to kind of grab what I was learning in classical music and apply it to the drums. I was not seeing the bridge at that moment. And I would be practicing piano, and my drums were right next to the piano, and I was like, oh man, I think I'm going to play drums instead. So, drums always won the battle, but definitely it opened my ear in a completely different way to study all that stuff.
Okay. When did you see the bridge between the two?
Much later. Much later. When I started making the connection also between jazz and classical music, how harmony and structure and counterpoint and all that stuff applies to everything, and also interplaying, me on the drums with other musicians. One of the things I like the most is to try to create counterpoint and tension and release and all these things that, the greatest classical music, is very obvious when it's happening. And that was the foundation for a lot of the modern Western music, obviously, and how it's built.
Who were the things you were all listening to at that time? Because you got the classical, jazz, rock.
Well, I was always a rockhead, so my first influences were the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, everything my mom listened to. And she's also a rockhead. So The Who, Janis Joplin, Led Zeppelin, the Cream. She actually used to say that Ginger Baker was like my real father. Because I would go crazy in her belly, apparently, when he would take a drum solo. So then I started listening to Rush, The Police, and then I got into fusion with the Chicory Electric Band, and John Scofield, Mahavishnu Orchestra. And when I was at that stage, also Mike Stern, that's when I started studying classical music. So it was like these two things that I was juggling, but I was not really joining the dots at that point. I was not ready.
I know when I was a kid, I was because I loved rock and all that. I was the black kid who liked rock. Did you ever have to deal with that in your world in Mexico City?
No, because Mexico is kind of a homogenous place. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I would get bullied in school, even though we're all kind of Mexican, but whoever is darker gets bullied, and
same thing.
Exactly. So that's I think a worldwide custom that keeps happening, but the big British and American bands were so big that I didn't really have to go through that. I think I go through that more now, like a Mexican trying to play jazz.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because there's a lot of really good rock musicians in Mexico and good rock bands. But jazz, even though there's a lot of great jazz musicians, there's no really international jazz music. Like, for example, you have Santana, and that's already a reference. Like, that's what it sounds like. But jazz, I'm kind of the first one that has stayed in the big leagues for a while, and I'm incredibly lucky to be in that position. Did
you have people warn you of that or tell you about that beforehand? That might be a liability?
No, not at all. Not at all. And especially, and I'm glad nobody did, because I was very naive. And I kept thinking, well, why wouldn't I be able to do it? And because I was so sure of myself, stupidly so. But I'm glad I was, because that kind of made me like a horse with the things that just led you see, forward. And that kind of helped just to keep plowing ahead without thinking, oh, wait a minute, I'm Mexican. What am I doing here? So I'm glad I didn't think in those terms back then.
So what did you have an idea what you want your career to look like?
I mean,
like early on.
I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be playing stadiums with amazing rock bands. And I tried it. I tried the rock band thing, but it was just the formula is so complex and so unattainable that I started just getting really frustrated. In the Mexican scene, and usually all the musicians that I was playing with, they had day jobs and they had stuff to do, and I was just concentrating on music 100%. So my level was way higher, and it was always getting better. And they were not. So, and you always need a charismatic singer with an amazing voice, blah, blah, blah. So I was just started getting a little frustrated with the whole scene in Mexico. And slowly I just started getting better and thinking, well, maybe I can just become a commodity. My drumming be a commodity, and people calling me for all kinds of things. And I wanted to be the most versatile drummer on the planet, and record all kinds of from jingles to country music to whatever. And then I started realizing that that's also really hard, because there's people that are incredibly specialized in their fields. And little by little, just improvisation and the love of improvisation just started sending me more towards jazz.
Okay.
And when I got there, I was like, okay, I can do without playing reggae, and I can do without playing country music and jingles, but I cannot do without playing jazz. So that's when I knew, okay, this is what I want to do.
Okay. Yeah. What was the rock scene like in Mexico?
I mean, it was cool. It was way bigger than the jazz scene, for sure. But there were not that many places to play, and there were not that many references of like Spanish rock, meaning from Spain. They were. Mexico has always been a little chauvinistic in the sense. I should not say chauvinistic. It's just a country that always loves to welcome people from other places before they welcome people from their own town. A
lot of places.
Exactly. So it was fun. I was a teenager, and but that was that.
Yeah. Why do you think jazz has not taken root there?
I mean, now there's tons of really, really good musicians. There's a nice scene, healthy. There's really young musicians that are just playing really well and know, what they need to do. Yeah. The thing is, always the problem in those kinds of countries is the infrastructure. There's just not that many opportunities. There's not that many places to play. There's not enough festivals. Enough radio, so everybody's kind of just trying to get by with whatever they can. But there are more and more musicians always trying to do things right, which is very encouraging.
Okay, what do you think it is about you that made you break out of that?
I think it was a combination of things. It was definitely I'm very competitive. I hate losing, and I was very, very competitive in school. Yeah. And I think teachers started paying attention. And also when I started coming up, there was, a fair amount of really good Latino musicians that were doing really interesting things. I mean, they still are, but at that moment they were kind of hot, which Danilo Perez and David Sanchez, Paquito Rivera. So I started playing with them, and there were not that many people at that moment that could play jazz and could play Latin really well, and that could open up Latin music, like Afro-Cuban music, especially with David Sanchez and Danilo. They definitely were playing Latin music, but one thing that Danilo would say is we're not playing Latin jazz, we're playing jazz Latin. Okay. So he wanted jazz to be at the forefront in terms of mentality, but we're playing Latin music, thinking of it as jazz. Okay. And that really kind of helped me propel myself a little bit more into the scene, because there were only 2, 3, 4 guys that could actually do that. Okay. And then little by little, I started kind of getting a little bit more of a name. And there was a point where I was like, wait, do I want to keep doing the Latin thing? Because that's obviously, my name is Antonio Sanchez. I'm from Mexico. That's the logical thing to do. But then Pat Metheny happened. So, and then Pat just kind of propelled me into this other scene where I was able to not have to decide, okay, do I want to be a Latin musician? My career just kind of went another way, which was very freeing. Yeah. It was very liberating, because I was getting worried, okay, how many other people can I play with that are going to be like these other guys that I've been playing with that want to open Latin music that way? And there was a resurgence definitely back then, but then it started going a different way. A year after year, there was more resurgence to just kind of acoustic jazz, and now there's more of a resurgence of electric jazz.
Yeah.
So I've been trying really hard, not because I'm afraid of what I'm going to do. If I just keep my style, a certain way, there's people that have definitely kept their original thing why they got famous going, and that's fine. But I've been always just really curious about stuff, So whenever I, like for example, right now we're in my studio here in at home, and when I started getting just some gear and some electronics, and I just started being fascinated with the things you could do. And now I do full records down here. So, I think that curiosity has kind of kept me in the loop a little bit more than if I was just like trying to play still acoustic jazz or Latin jazz.
Okay. When did the Pat Metheny take off?
Officially 2001.
Okay.
That's when we recorded the first album. That's when we did the first tour. And 2002, that's when we did the first big tour with the Pat Metheny Group.
Okay. And when did your first solo album was out?
My first solo album was 2007.
Okay.
I think it was. Yeah, it took me a while.
Yeah.
It took me a while. I didn't think I was ready or I had anything to offer as a band leader, as a composer. Okay. I mean, I did little gigs here and there as a band leader, and I had a couple of tunes that I wrote, but I was not, interested because I had so much work as a sideman at that moment, and being a sideman is just so much easier than to be a leader. So I was really not that interested, and every time there was a good opportunity to do something as a leader, I would take it, but it was not my priority. Definitely.
How do you avoid that where you've got the successful sideman thing, but like to be your own band leader?
Well, I don't think you can do both because when I was trying to do both, the problem I would encounter very often is that, I would be in Europe with, 4 different bands during the year, and then I would want to bring my band to the same places where I was already 4 times. And promoters would not be super into it, because they had already seen me a bunch of times. So then I had to start cutting back. And I basically just ended up playing just with Metheny, and then my own thing. But then even playing with Metheny started getting a little, just in terms of logistics and how to coordinate, and it was just, I was killing myself a little bit, being 4 or 5 weeks out with them, and then another 4 with my band or 3. I would just come home and I would get sick, and I was hurt, everything was hurting. So then I this year I basically took off from Metheny, and I've been really trying to concentrate on mine.
Okay. And for your songwriting, like when did you start like seriously writing? Was that like that came along with the band leader? I mean, the first album I did was called Migration. I had maybe 4 original tunes in there, and that was great. That was fun, but I still didn't feel like I had a voice as a composer. And then I did a live record of the same music, and I invited like Miguel Zenon to provide a tune, and I had a couple of tunes from Pat that I played, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when I really found... when I really kind of broke the wall as a composer, I think was when I did my album New Life, and hence the name, because I really felt like I was kind of reborn as a composer, as an artist, as a band leader, and that's when I started really taking it way more serious. And I wanted to do an album every year or every year and a half, and just kind of starting to start to make my mark as an artist, as a solo artist, not as a drummer. What did you have to do differently for that to take place?
Well, like I said, I had to stop doing a bunch of other stuff. And I had to, really kind of coming to terms with the fact that it was going to be really hard. It was going to be a much harder existence than before. I was going to be way more stressed than before, make less money than before. But then, thankfully, in the midst of all that, then Birdman happened. And Birdman obviously has been an incredible push for my career. Just because my name started circulating in other spheres that normally I didn't have access to. So just to appear on, Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone, is just something that jazz musicians always want, but never can get. So this being part of a pop culture event such as a Hollywood movie, and especially a movie that won 4 Oscars and kind of became iconic in its own way because of the way it was shot, because of the timing of when it came out, and also because the score, obviously, the daring side of things, and just just putting a naked drum set on top of that, those images. So it was obviously something that a lot of people remembered, and that just kind of was a catalyst for other cool things to start happening in my band leading career.
What did they hear what had they heard about your music or for you to get that?
To get Birdman?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a serendipitous story because when I was in Mexico, I used to listen a lot to the radio. And one of the stations I used to listen to the most was the station called WFM 96.9.
Okay.
And they kind of played the hippest music back then. And it was a combination of a bunch of different things. Pretty eclectic. And one of the DJs was Alejandro González Iñárritu, the director. And then he started making movies and he started getting big. But he was always, an audiophile. He always, knew a lot about music and loved music. And Pat Metheny was one of his favorite artists. And I discovered Pat in one of his shows that they used to have at night, which was a little bit more sophisticated music. Yeah. And, Last Train Home came on. And I heard that. I was like, wow, what is this? And then somebody said, okay, this is, Pat Metheny Group, Last Train Home. I was like, oh, this is really cool. So I started checking more of Pat. Then fast forward many years, I got the gig with the Pat Metheny Group. Yeah. And then Iñárritu came to a gig we did in L.A. in 2005. And that's when we met. And, it was really cool right from the beginning. Yeah. And he was especially excited of the fact that there was a Mexican playing drums in one of his favorite bands, So
because you don't see that every day.
Exactly.
Not at all, right?
Nobody had ever seen that. Yeah. So we hit it off right away and stayed in touch. And then when the chance came to do this, he thought of me, thankfully. Yeah. And, I was just kind of the tool through who he was able to deliver his crazy concept.
When something like that happens, did you feel ready for it to accept that?
I mean, it's funny because when I tell the story, I always tell that, he called me, and he never used to call me. He would email or something like that. And he called me, and I was like, okay, I better pick this up. Yeah. And I was in a car, rental car in Miami with my wife and her grandmother. And, I picked up the phone like, hello. And then she sounded like really hyper and excited. Yeah. Like, Antonio, hey man, it's Alejandro, and I'm thinking of my next project is going to be a dark comedy, and I think the whole score should just be drums. Are you in? Do you want to do it? and I'm driving, and I'm like, yeah, of course. All right, great. I'll send you the script. Yeah. So I hung up, and I was like, flabbergasted. I was super excited, and then like a minute later, I was like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? It just kind of dawned on me that it was going to be a Hollywood movie with just me playing drums. And that was a very scary prospect. But the overriding factor was always the fact that it was him. Yeah. And that he knows exactly what he wants and why he wants it and how he wants it. So I was just like, okay, I just got to trust him and it's going to be fine.
Okay. So after that happens, like, how do you decide, like, how you want your career to go? I mean, because you can do pretty much what you want.
Well, not really. I mean, it definitely boosted my career in the ways that I told you before.
Yeah.
But then when it comes down to, okay, now I'm going to do this band leader thing, you're still dealing with the same things that are just there. It was just a little easier. But I'm still a Mexican trying to play, jazz drums and write jazz and be in the festivals. And, I've been pretty ubiquitous for the last 22 years. On the road and, always doing stuff. And since 2007, I've been very consistent as a band leader that puts out records. So, now that I'm doing it basically full time, it's daunting. It's scary still, and every record, it's a fight to try to get it to the right people, to try to get it to people to listen to it. There's so much music out there that if you're not working with people that really know how to get through all the other crap, then it's almost like if you didn't put out anything. Because people don't know about it. And that's usually the hardest part. You can have a magnificent, work of art, but if you don't have an amazing publicist that puts it out there and lets everybody know what it is, then you're doomed. And also now there has to be an angle. You cannot just put out a nice record of dance music. Now it has to be about something and has to have a story and background so that people get interested. And the first one to tell you that will be the publicist. It's like, man, this thing, I cannot sell it. There's nothing for me to...
Where's your story?
Exactly. So, in my case, it's been the silver lining in all this crap that has been happening since Trump announced his candidacy and then that later became president, is that it was really also a catalyst for a lot of the work that I've been doing lately, because as a Mexican and now as an American, since I became an American citizen right before he got elected, it's been the timing, man, was like perfect. So, since that has happened, it's really been such a part of anybody that is paying attention. This has become something that you cannot look away from. So it has thankfully been processed by my mind and my spirit and my body through music, and that has really kind of taken a big weight off my back. I feel in the sense of that, it's an exit for my feelings and my anger and my frustration, that I can, at the end of the day, I can have something hopefully beautiful that people will dig, and there'll be something positive coming out of whatever it is that I'm putting out there.
Okay. So how do you to put those emotions out there and put them into a song? How do you do that when you're sitting down to write? I
mean, I don't think about it, and that's a beautiful thing about, I think, writing, that if you try to write a certain way, I mean, at least for me, it's hard. I just have to kind of let go and see what happens, and then at the end, I kind of make sense of the whole thing. So I'm not usually okay, now I'm gonna write a whole album about immigrants, because I just don't work that way. What I do is I write a bunch of music, and then at the end, it's kind of interesting. Usually it gets revealed to me, what it is and what it is about, and what the name should be, and what the name of the tunes should be. And luckily that has been happening since New Life, basically. That it's been kind of easy to know, okay, what am I going to do next? And that has been a really just fortunate thing that has been happening to me.
Okay. And you've had how many albums in the past year and a half? Like 3, 4 albums?
Eight albums total as a band leader, and I'm working on the 9th.
Okay. Okay. And how's that coming along?
Great. I think it's going to be. I have a lot of faith in this album, and also after putting out Lights in the Sand, which is a complex album. The first tune is 20 minutes. The last tune is like 25 or 26 minutes. I wanted to do something that is kind of the opposite of that. So, I don't know how this came about, but I wanted to do Bad Hombre Volume 2. Which Bad Hombre, I did it all here in my studio. I played all the instruments, and it was basically drum improvisations that then I later started editing and arranging and producing, and just giving them some shape. And the drum improvisations were highly influenced by what was going on politically and socially in the country at the time, and still is. It's actually gotten worse since, but it was just a way of getting drums are great for that.
Yeah, I would imagine.
You hit stuff. So if you want to get stuff out, it's just the perfect vehicle. So that's what I did. And hence the name Bad Hombre. When I finished the record, I was like, okay, this is what it needs to be. And it had obviously a play on words on that Trump said, okay, we have bad hombres here, we have to get them out, meaning Mexicans, and Bad Hombre in the sense that when somebody's bad in jazz, that means they're good. And then I did it all by myself, so it's just a solitary hombre, just one man show. So I wanted to do volume 2 of that, but I wanted to do something different, So I thought, okay, maybe what I could do is kind of ask some of my favorite singer-songwriters to provide me with a very naked, exposed tune. Just vocals and whatever else they want, but as, the more naked, the better, so that I can do my thing around it. And, I've been asking people, they've been slowly agreeing to it, because obviously it's very personal, to just give me a tune and see what I can do with it. But I did it, the first one I did was for this incredibly talented singer from Mexico. Her name is Silvana Estrada, and I met her here in New York actually a bit like 3-4 years ago. And she blew me away. She's from Veracruz, and in Veracruz they have a very amazing musical thing going on. It's very close to the Caribbean, so they have definitely African and Caribbean influence over there. And she has also this kind of almost like a flamenco Arab thing going on with her voice that, when I heard it, I was just, wow, man, she's bad. So she had this tune in 5 that I really, really liked. And I asked her if she could just, lend it to me, see what I could do with it. And she just sent me the track of just the voice and cuatro, which is a little guitar with 4 strings. And it's just beautiful. When she sent it to me, I was like, man, I don't know if I can do anything to that, because it was just so beautiful. And then I started messing with it. And it was so much fun to do it that I thought, man, I think I want to do the whole record like this, because it's just, I cannot write songs that way. That's not what I do, but they can. But I can produce it and play drums on it in a way that I only can. I feel, so the idea is for the voice to be the main thing, and then the drums to be like right there with the voice. Everything else is kind of built around the voice and the drums, which I don't think there are a lot of albums out there that have that kind of hierarchy in terms of what's going on that you're listening to. So I think I'm going to do the whole record like that, and I don't want to mention more names because they still haven't.
We should be surprised.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be a surprise, and I feel like I've been doing complex, very deep music, at least trying to. And this is going to be a little lighter. It's going to be deep, definitely. And one of the things that I've asked the artists that I'm reaching out to is that I want it still to be like social justice element to the songs that they provide. I think that's still very important to me to keep talking about that. Because as we all know, things are just going in the completely
we can't stop talking about
wrong direction. So I think that's going to be a really cool thing that I'm going to get to do next year. when I did the first Bad Hombre, I didn't tour it because it was just me, and I was like, man, I don't know how to do this. But now I have a couple of musicians in mind that could be great, and could be a very different thing from what I've been doing as a band leader.
Okay, I'm excited for that.
Yeah,
that sounds great, dude.
Thanks, man.
So, where's the best place for people to keep up with you online?
I'm very active on all the social media thing, and on Facebook, Twitter. Well, Twitter is more like my political venting thing for a lot of people, I think. But that's where you will see me insulting all kinds of people. And in all the other social media platforms, I'm pretty good at keeping people posted about what I'm doing, and my website, which is being revamped. But
Antonio Sanchez.
AntonioSanchez.net. And between my band and then Birdman shows that I've been doing, where I play live to the movie, and then things that just fall in my lap to do here in my studio. Yeah. I'm doing the third season of Get Shorty, which is on EPIX, and now the first 2 seasons are on Netflix, I think. But that's also, been a blast. That's been great because that has allowed me to stay home a little bit more, work more in the studio, and not just be touring like a madman, like a nameless man, which was also one of my goals. Just try to tour only with the things that I really want to tour with.
God, I love that, dude. This was great.
Thanks, man. It's nice to have a conversation.
Sure.
In a relaxed atmosphere.
And I gotta say, so on tape, you are like one of my favorite new jazz artists, man.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. So congratulations. I wish you all the best and
appreciate
continued success.
You too.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Antonio Sanchez. Make sure you hit up his website, AntonioSanchez.net. This is where I usually close out after playing the song by the guest, but for a 26-minute piece, I believe I'm going to end with it. But first, some housekeeping. I am online at talkmusictalk.com for more podcast information and to stream every single episode. I am also on social media at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at This Is Boys. And some special requests for you. Please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and many more. Just search for Talk Music Talk with Boys. Also, please leave a 5-star rating and or review when you are there because it helps to increase audience exposure. There is also a Talk Music Talk app. It is free wherever you like to get your apps. Again, just search for Talk Music Talk with Boys. And don't forget to check out my other podcast, The Strandcast, the official podcast of Strand Bookstore in New York City at 12th and Broadway. Link in the show notes. And before I close out with Lines in the Sand, I want to thank you for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.
Crosses erased from its gleaming surface, replaced with hues of red, white, and blue. 55 feet of cold concrete that runs from the Pacific to the Gulf, and a cheer from those who used to browse, joyous, relieved, grateful, and a silenced cry from those who used to walk, hoping their water and prayers will last. Tell us your dishonored names, and we will testify. Oye, listen.
Pledge allegiance to my abuelo, to the calluses on his Sierra Mountain hands, to the guitar he'd haul through the desert, strapped to his back like a weapon. I pledge allegiance to the music we make from our survival, to my immigrant parents, to my immigrant grandparents, to my immigrant great-grandparents, to the ones who brought us here, to the dreams they shoved inside their pockets like breadcrumbs and loose lint. I pledge allegiance to my abuelita, to her seared palms on the tortillera, to the food our mothers pack into our stomachs for wherever we call home. I pledge allegiance to home, and to the naming of it, to the first indigenous child to call this something other than a white man's land, to the first town to grimace at the threshold of a border. I pledge allegiance not to the border, but to my father's rusted car, not to the Exodus, but to the knapsack on my great-grandfather's belt, not to genocide, to the handkerchief ripping the sweat from my great-grandmother's brow. I pledge allegiance to the pregnant bellies they prayed to the accents soaking their tongues, to everything they carried over and everything we left behind. I pledge allegiance to the resumes they made of cardboard signs, to the family-made worker, worker-made machine, producer-made product. I pledge allegiance to the chef, to the grape picker, to the meat packer, to the march, to the strike, to the vocalizing of fight, blood cry of survival. I pledge allegiance to survival, of the 9 to 9, to the endurance of fear, of castigation, of always being blamed, of living just to be blamed, of workers' liberation in lieu of deportation. I pledge allegiance to staying. I pledge allegiance to going. I pledge allegiance to remaining and longing, despite knowledge of a forbidden future. I pledge allegiance not to the blood, but to the scar, not to the blister, but to the thickening of skin, to the gash recovered, to the body's retort, to whatever has tried to kill us. I pledge allegiance to the heart rate after a knock at the door, or a slander of names, or crushing of bone. I pledge allegiance to the trembling of fingers, to no la abras, to no te paras, to I don't have to. I wasn't dealt a bad hand. I was born a good life, under a bad law, with my good name, and my good skin, and my good voice, blessed for far more than this.